The winter wind cut through Shadow Creek like a blade through silk, carrying with it the metallic scent of coming snow and something darker, something that made honest folk pull their shutters tight and bar their doors. March 1882 in Montana Territory meant the land was caught between seasons, between the dying cold and reluctant spring, between the old ways and whatever new hell was riding in from the east. 5 riders crested the ridge just as the sun began its slow descent behind the Tobacco Root Mountains, their silhouettes black against the amber sky, like ravens perched on a gallows beam. The thunder of hooves on frozen ground echoed through the valley, a sound that every soul in Shadow Creek knew meant trouble of the worst kind. Doors slammed, children were yanked inside by trembling mothers. Shop windows went dark in rapid succession like candles snuffed by an unseen hand. But one woman did not run. At the far end of Main Street, in a garden that had become something of a local treasure over the past 20 years, Evangeline Thornfield continued her pruning, as if those riders were nothing more than a passing breeze. Her silver hair, swept back in a practical bun, caught the last rays of sunlight. Her hands, weathered and spotted with age, moved with deliberate precision as she clipped deadwood from her prize roses. 58 years had etched lines around her ice-blue eyes, but those eyes tracked every movement of the approaching riders with the cold calculation of a chess master studying an opponent's opening gambit. The townspeople who knew her, who had bought her preserves and admired her flowers and called her Widow Thornfield, with the kind of respect reserved for beloved matriarchs, they did not know the truth. They did not know that those steady hands had once been the fastest draw in 4 territories. They did not know that behind the gentle facade of an elderly gardener stood a woman who had sent 31 outlaws to early graves before most of these riders had learned to shave. They called her Phantom Eva in the days before Shadow Creek, before peace, before she buried her guns and her past beneath 20 years of quiet living. The woman who could materialize from darkness like smoke, whose draw was so fast that men swore she moved between heartbeats. The legend who had hunted the worst killers the frontier had to offer alongside her husband, United States Marshal Josiah Thornfield, until the day violence took him from her and she from it. 31 confirmed kills across 6 territories, more bank robbers and murderers put in the ground than any 3 lawmen combined. A reputation built on precision silence and an almost supernatural ability to know what a man would do before he did it. The federal bounty had expired a decade ago when everyone assumed she was dead. But private collectors, the kind who dealt in legends and trophies, they would pay a fortune for a woman like her. The writers did not know this. How could they? All they saw was an old woman tending flowers alone and vulnerable in a town with no sheriff and no hope of help for at least 3 days. Their mistake would be measured in blood and regret. The year was 1882, a time when the frontier was dying, but not yet dead, when the old violence still lurked in the spaces between civilization's fragile outposts. Montana Territory remained a place where the law was whatever force a man or woman could muster, where justice came from the barrel of a gun more often than from a courtroom, where survival meant being harder than whatever darkness came riding over the next ridge. And darkness was coming to Shadow Creek. If you are watching this from somewhere with winter storms still raging somewhere, the wind cuts cold and bitter, drop a comment below and let us know where you are calling home. Hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story reveals exactly how Evangeline Thornfield became Phantom Eva. And trust me when I say you will not want to miss a single word of that tale. But tonight we watch as thugs make the fatal error of underestimating an elderly widow, never knowing they had just walked into the sights of a legend they believed was 20 years dead. Evangeline Thornfield had cultivated her disguise with the same meticulous care she brought to her rose garden. For 2 decades, she had been nothing more than the quiet widow at the edge of town, a woman of dignified bearing and gentle manner who sold preserves that tasted of summer and grew flowers that brought color to the hardscrabble lives of Shadow Creek's 280 souls. Her cabin sat at the western boundary where Main Street dissolved into wilderness, a modest structure of weathered pine with a wraparound porch in that magnificent garden. Roses of every variety bloomed there in seasoned varietals she had collected from across the continent, crimson damask from the East Coast, pale tea roses that had survived the journey from San Francisco, hardy prairie roses that could weather Montana's brutal winters. She knew each plant like a mother knows her children, understanding their needs, their temperaments, their secret languages. What they did not see were the tells, the small fractures in her carefully constructed persona that would have screamed truth to anyone trained to look. But Shadow Creek had no one trained to look. Not anymore. That morning before the riders came, Ava had been working when young Annabelle Pritchard came running up the dirt path, pigtails flying, clutching a glass jar of milk her guardian had sent over. The child was 9 years old, all blonde curls and bright green eyes, an orphan since the Harker Gang had killed her father 7 months prior in the town of Stillwater, 40 miles south. The jar slipped from Annabelle's small hands. Eva's hands shot out behind her back, catching the jar without turning, without even pausing in her pruning. The catch was one-handed, precise, the kind of reflex that spoke to years of training where a split second could mean life or death. Annabelle gasped in delight. "How did you do that, Miss Eva?" "Practice, child," Eva said, handing back the jar with a gentle smile that hid the spike of alarm in her chest. Too fast, too instinctive. 20 years and the old reflexes were still there, coiled like springs beneath her skin. When you have been dropping things as long as I have, you learn to catch them. The lie came easy. All lies did after enough repetition. If someone had studied Eva's garden with an eye for tactics rather than beauty, they would have noticed something peculiar. The layout formed a perfect tactical grid. From her kitchen window, she had unobstructed sightlines to every approach. The rose bushes, while beautiful, were arranged in staggered rows that created natural choke points and clear lanes of fire. The small decorative rocks that lined her pathways were positioned at measured intervals, range markers that her feet knew by memory even in darkness. No blind spots, no covered approaches. Every angle accounted for. When she walked, her feet made no sound despite the old boards of her porch that creaked and groaned under everyone else's weight. She knew which boards were solid and which were not, where to step to move like smoke. Old cavalry habits died hard, and some part of her would always be the scout who could cross a camp of sleeping soldiers without disturbing a single snore. She never startled, ever. People noticed it, sometimes remarked on how nothing seemed to surprise Widow Thornfield, but they attributed it to the serenity of age rather than the truth, which was that her ears cataloged every sound within 100 yards. She heard visitors long before they arrived, their footfalls telling her wait, gate, intent. On clear mornings, she would stand on her porch and read the weather with the precision of a cavalry scout who had learned that rain could turn a battle, that wind could carry sound and scent, that survival meant understanding the language of earth and sky. She could tell you when a storm would arrive within an hour, could smell snow on the wind 2 days out, could predict the temperature at noon by the way frost formed on her window panes at dawn. The townspeople thought it was folk wisdom, the accumulated knowledge of a woman who had lived long and paid attention. They were half right. Shadow Creek clung to the northern slope of the Tobacco Root Range like a barnacle on a ship's hull, stubborn and improbable. Silver had been discovered there in 1868, a modest vein that promised fortune, but delivered only steady employment for the kind of men who preferred hard work to wild speculation. The boom never came. The bust never came either. The town simply existed, population holding steady around 300 souls who worked the mines, ran the businesses that served the miners, and raised families in the knowledge that they would probably die within 20 miles of where they were born. Main Street ran east to west, following the natural contour of the land. At the eastern end stood the Red Canyon Saloon, a two-story structure with a false front that made it look grander than it was, owned by a former prospector named Garrett, who had lost his taste for hard rock and found his calling in hard liquor. Next came Muller's General Store, run by Klaus Muller, who had emigrated from Prussia in 1860 and somehow ended up in Montana selling everything from flour to dynamite to bolts of calico cloth. The Presbyterian Church occupied the middle of Main Street, a simple white clapboard building with a modest steeple that held a bell salvaged from a river steamer that had foundered somewhere on the Missouri. Reverend Matthias Stonewell, 72 years old with a beard like a snowdrift and eyes that had seen the elephant during the war, presided over services that were short on hellfire and long on practical Christianity. Across from the church sat Dr. Constance Aldridge's office and surgery, a neat building that smelled of carbolic acid and dried herbs. Dr. Aldridge was an anomaly, a British-educated female physician who had arrived in Shadow Creek 5 years prior after her husband, also a doctor, had died of typhoid in Denver. She had no patience for the prejudices that suggested women could not practice medicine, and she had proven her competence so thoroughly that even the most skeptical miners now sought her care without hesitation. Shadow Creek had no sheriff's office because Shadow Creek had no sheriff. The town was too small, too remote, too poor to justify a permanent lawman. The territorial marshal in Helena, 3 days' hard ride to the north, would send someone if called, but that someone would arrive long after whatever crisis had prompted the call had resolved itself one way or another. This absence of law had never been much of a problem because Shadow Creek attracted a certain type of person, the kind who wanted to work hard and be left alone, who valued community precisely because it was small enough to know everyone by name. Disputes were settled by common agreement or if necessary by Muller, who served as unofficial mayor by virtue of owning the store and being level-headed enough that both sides of any argument would accept his judgment. But this absence of law also meant that when trouble came riding in from outside, when men with guns and no conscience decided Shadow Creek looked like easy pickings, there was no one to stand between them and their prey. Eva knew 5 people in town who knew or suspected pieces of her truth, though only one knew the full story. Reverend Matthias Stonewell had been an army chaplain during the war, had served with units that operated in the same territories where Eva and Josiah had hunted outlaws. He had never met her then, but he had heard the stories, and when a woman matching the legend's description had arrived in Shadow Creek in 1862, calling herself Evangeline Thornfield and claiming to be a widow seeking peace, Matthias had known. They had spoken once late at night in the empty church, and Eva had confirmed what he suspected. He had agreed to keep her secret, to help her bury her past, to let her find whatever redemption or rest she sought in his congregation. In 20 years, he had never broken that confidence. Though sometimes during services when he preached about mercy and second chances, he would look at Eva and then she would know the sermon was meant for her. Tobias Ashford, called Toby by everyone, was 21 years old and built like an ox from 6 years of working the forge at his master's smithy. His parents had died of scarlet fever when he was 14, leaving him orphaned and penniless. Eva had taken him in for 3 years, given him a place to sleep in her small cabin's loft, fed him, mothered him in a distant way that never presumed to replace what he had lost. He called her Aunt Eva and loved her with the fierce loyalty of someone who remembers cold and hunger and knows the value of kindness. He had no idea about her past, knew only that Widow Thornfield was the best person he had ever known, and he would fight anyone who said otherwise. Dr. Constance Aldridge suspected. She was too observant not to notice things, too intelligent not to connect them. The old scar on Eva's left shoulder, revealed during an examination after a bad fall 2 winters prior, was a bullet wound. The nightmares that sometimes gripped Eva, that sent her to the doctor's office requesting laudanum to help her sleep, spoke of trauma deeper than the death of a spouse. Constance had never pushed, never pried, but she watched, and she had concluded that Evangeline Thornfield had secrets worth keeping, and that whatever violence lived in her past had been balanced by 2 decades of genuine goodness. That was enough. Annabelle Pritchard, the 9-year-old orphan, knew nothing except that Miss Eva grew the prettiest roses and always had hard candy in her apron pocket and told stories about birds and plants that made the world seem full of wonders instead of terrors. Annabelle had nightmares about the day her father died, about the men with guns who had laughed as they burned the house, and sometimes Miss Eva would sit with her and sing old songs in a language Annabelle did not recognize until the fear receded. The child did not know she was being watched over by a woman who had killed more men than Annabelle had years of life, who had looked into the eyes of evil and pulled the trigger without hesitation, who understood exactly what kind of monsters haunted a little girl's dreams, because she had spent decades hunting those monsters across territories and deserts and mountains. The Harker Gang had been a plague across Montana territory for 8 months, a cancer that metastasized from town to town, leaving burned buildings and fresh graves in its wake. 47 confirmed dead, dozens more wounded, beaten, traumatized. 4 towns partially or completely destroyed. Their pattern was simple and effective. Ride into a small settlement, assess the defenses, make impossible demands backed by overwhelming force. Most towns paid, those that resisted burned. Those that fought were massacred as examples to the next town on the map. Shadow Creek had been watching the gangs approach like farmers watching a tornado, hoping it would veer away, knowing it probably would not. The telegraph line had been cut 4 days prior, isolating them from Helena and any hope of calling for help. People had started talking about evacuation, about packing wagons and fleeing into the mountains until the danger passed. But where would they go? How long would they stay? What would be left when they returned? These questions hung unanswered as the 5 riders came down Main Street at a walking pace, letting the town get a good look at them, letting fear do its work. Luther Harker rode at the front, and he was exactly the kind of man who became an outlaw chieftain through a combination of charisma, cruelty, and a complete absence of conscience. 44 years old, 6 feet 3 inches of hardened muscle and casual menace. His black beard was shot through with gray, and a scar bisected his left eyebrow, the souvenir of a hanging that had not quite taken where he had survived the noose long enough for his gang to cut him down. He wore dual navy Colts in ornate holsters, the guns inlaid with gold filigree and mother-of-pearl grips, weapons chosen more for intimidation than practicality. His horse was a magnificent black gelding that probably cost more than everything Shadow Creek's miners earned in 6 months combined. Behind him rode 4 of his lieutenant's men, whose names and reputations preceded them like heralds of apocalypse. Cutter Rollins was the gang's sharpshooter, a former buffalo hunter with a Sharps rifle and the patience of a stone. Lean and weathered with eyes that never stopped moving, cataloging threats and angles and distances. He was the smart one, the thinker, the man who actually planned the raids, while Luther soaked up the glory. Ox Brennan provided the muscle, 300 pounds of means packed into a frame that looked like it had been carved from a tree trunk with a dull axe. Not bright, but loyal as a hound and twice as vicious when pointed at a target. Vicente Morales handled the knife work quiet and deadly, with hands that moved like striking snakes when violence was needed. The fifth rider was younger, maybe 30, a man called Quick Jimmy, who fancied himself a gunfighter and wore his Remington low on his hip in a tie-down rig that marked him as someone who cared more about looking dangerous than being effective. They stopped in front of Muller's General Store right in the center of Main Street where everyone could see them. Luther dismounted with theatrical slowness, brushing trail dust from his coat, letting his gaze sweep the buildings like a conqueror surveying new territory. Eva stood across the street, 60 feet away, a basket of cut roses over her arm. She had been walking to the church to arrange them in the sanctuary. Now she simply stood and watched, her face placid, her posture relaxed, everything about her suggesting a harmless old woman caught outdoors when trouble arrived. But her mind was counting guns, noting draw positions, cataloging weaknesses, running calculations that had nothing to do with flowers and everything to do with fields of fire and kill zones. Luther noticed her. Of course he did. She was the only person on the street who had not run inside. "Well now," he said, his voice carrying in the silence, "ain't that sweet? Grandma's picking flowers." His men laughed, the cruel, casual laughter of predators who have never known a challenge, who see the world divided into the quick and the dead and assume they will always be the former. Luther walked toward her, spurs jingling, that big horse following behind him like an obedient dog. He stopped 5 feet away, close enough to be intimidating, and smiled down at her with the kind of condescension usually reserved for children and simpletons. "Ma'am, you should be inside," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "Dangerous out here for a fragile old woman like yourself." Eva met his gaze without flinching, without lowering her eyes, and in that moment, Luther Harker felt something he had not felt in years. The faintest whisper of unease, like a cold finger trailing down his spine. There was something in those calm blue eyes, something that did not match the silver hair and lined face and basket of roses. "I have survived worse than you, young man," Eva said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, simple and declarative, and for just a second Luther did not know how to respond, because there was no fear in her voice, no trembling, nothing, but calm statement of fact. Then he laughed again, reaching out to pat her shoulder in a gesture so patronizing it made several watching townspeople flinch. "I am sure you have, sweetheart. Now run along before you get hurt." Eva did not move, did not even acknowledge the hand on her shoulder beyond a slight narrowing of her eyes. Luther's smile hardened. He was not accustomed to defiance, especially not from elderly women who should be cowering and begging. He leaned closer, letting her smell the whiskey on his breath, the road dust, the violence that clung to him like perfume. "I said run along." "I heard you," Eva replied. "I chose not to comply." The other riders had gathered closer now, sensing entertainment, eager to see how their boss would handle the strange old bird, who apparently had not received the message that she should be terrified. Luther's hand moved to his gun, not drawing, just resting on the grip in an unmistakable threat. "Old woman, you are about 5 seconds from learning a very painful lesson about respect." Eva looked at his hand on the gun, then back at his face, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made even Ox, who was not given to deep thinking, shift uncomfortably in his saddle. "Young man, the only lesson being learned today is the one about consequences. You just have not realized it yet." Before Luther could respond, Klaus Muller came hurrying out of his store, hands raised in a placating gesture, his round face flushed with anxiety. "Please, sir, please. Mrs. Thornfield means no offense. She is just an old widow. She does not understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Eva said, still watching Luther with those unsettling eyes. Muller grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "Eva, please, go home, now." Something in Muller's tone, the genuine fear beneath his words, made Eva relent. She nodded once, stepped back, and walked away down the street toward her cabin, the basket of roses still over her arm, her pace unhurried, refusing to run, even though every instinct Luther's reputation should have triggered was screaming at her to flee. Luther watched her go, that unease still whispering at the base of his skull, until Cutter rode up beside him and spoke quietly. "Boss, we doing this, or just making conversation?" Luther shook it off, turned his attention back to Muller. "Business. That is what they were here for." "Fine town you got here." he said, his voice loud enough to carry to every hiding citizen. Real fine town. Be a shame if something happened to it. Mueller swallowed hard. What do you want? $3,000 in gold. You got 48 hours to raise it. The number hit Mueller like a physical blow. $3,000 was more than Shadow Creek generated in 3 months. It was an impossible sum, and Luther knew it, and that was exactly the point. We do not have that kind of money, Mueller said, his voice breaking. Sir, please, we are just miners and farmers and shopkeepers. We could maybe raise 300, maybe 4 if we... 3,000, Luther repeated. Or we start burning buildings, starting with the oldest, most useless structures first. His gaze drifted to Eva's cabin at the end of the street. That one, for instance. Old widow does not need such a big place. Be doing her a favor, really. Mueller's face went white. Please. 48 hours, Luther said. Then he noticed a child peeking around the corner of the church, blonde curls catching the sunlight. Annabelle, drawn by curiosity and the boldness of youth. Luther's smile returned cold and calculating. Actually, let us make this more interesting. Cutter grabbed the girl. Before anyone could react, Cutter had dismounted and scooped Annabelle up, his hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her screams. Dr. Aldridge came running from her office, but Ox blocked her path, the massive man grinning down at the middle-aged physician like a cat cornering a mouse. Let her go, Constance shouted. She is just a child. Insurance, Luther said. You folks behave, you get her back in 48 hours safe and sound. You cause trouble, well. He drew a finger across his throat. They locked Annabelle in the back room of the saloon, posting Quick Jimmy as guard, and then Luther gathered his men and addressed the town in a voice that carried authority and absolute certainty. 48 hours, 3,000 in gold. Anyone tries to be a hero, the girl pays the price. Anyone tries to leave town to fetch help, the girl pays the price. You so much as look at us wrong, the girl pays the price. We clear? Silence. The kind of silence that comes when an entire community realizes it has no options, no hope, no defense against the evil that has ridden into its midst. Luther nodded, satisfied. Good. We will be camped just north of town. Real close. You folks have a nice evening thinking about how you are going to find that money. They rode out, leaving Shadow Creek stunned and terrified, leaving Annabelle crying in a locked room, leaving Klaus Mueller standing in the middle of Main Street with the weight of 280 lives pressing down on his shoulders. No one noticed Eva standing on her porch watching the riders disappear over the northern ridge. No one saw the way her breathing had slowed and steadied, the way something cold and ancient had kindled behind her calm eyes. No one except Reverend Matthias Stonewell, who stood in the church doorway and recognized the look on her face because he had seen it before 2 decades ago in stories told by soldiers who had witnessed the legend at work. The widow was gone. The killer was waking up. The town meeting happened in Mueller's back room. 2 hours after sunset, 20 people crowded into a space meant for half that number. Voices raised in panic and desperation, and the kind of anger that comes when people feel helpless. We have to pay them, someone said. We cannot pay them. We do not have the money. Then we evacuate. Everyone leaves before they come back. And let them burn the whole town. Everything we have built. Better than dying. What about Annabelle? We cannot just leave her. Around and around it went the same arguments, circling like vultures. No solutions emerging because there were no good solutions, only choices between different flavors of catastrophe. Tobias stood near the back, his young face twisted with frustration. I will fight them, he said, loud enough to cut through the arguing. I am strong. I can use my hammer like a weapon. We get enough men together, we can... You will get yourself killed, Mueller said gently. Son, these are not miners or drunks. These are killers, professionals. Going against them with hammers and hunting rifles is suicide. So we do nothing? Toby's voice cracked. We just let them take whatever they want, hurt whoever they want. No one had an answer for that. Eva sat in the corner silent, watching and listening. She wore a dark shawl that shadowed her face, making her almost invisible in the dim lamplight. Her hands were folded in her lap, still and composed, while everyone else gestured and paced and radiated fear. Dr. Aldridge noticed. Constance always noticed. She caught Eva's eye across the room and saw something there that made her breath catch, something hard and certain, and completely at odds with the helpless despair filling the air. After 2 hours of circular arguing, the meeting dissolved with nothing decided except that they would try to gather whatever money they could and hope it would be enough to at least negotiate with Luther. People filed out into the night, shoulders slumped, hope dwindling. Eva remained seated until only she, Mueller, and Reverend Stonewell remained. Eva, Matthias said quietly. What are you thinking? She looked up at him and he saw his answer in her eyes before she spoke. That some problems cannot be solved with money or talk or hope. Muller frowned. What does that mean? It means, Eva said, rising to her feet with a grace that belonged to a much younger woman, that Annabelle is not going to spend the night locked in that room, terrified and alone. Eva, you cannot... Matthias started, but she cut him off with a look that reminded him exactly who he was talking to. I can, I have, and I will. She left before either man could argue further. Midnight found Shadow Creek silent and dark. Every window shuttered, every family huddled in their homes, praying the morning would not bring more horror. The saloon stood at the eastern end of Main Street, a single lamp burning in the front window, where Quick Jimmy sat guard his chair, tilted back against the wall, a bottle of whiskey keeping him company. Eva moved through the darkness like smoke, like memory, like the phantom she had once been. She wore dark clothes, trousers, and a heavy shirt that had belonged to Josiah Boots that made no sound on the hard-packed earth. Her hair was tied back tight, and her hands were empty of everything except purpose. She had not done this in 20 years, had not needed to, but the skills were still there, burned into muscle memory and instinct, waiting for the moment when survival demanded their return. She circled wide, coming at the saloon from the west, where the shadows were deepest. Two guards lounged at the back door, Ox and Vicente passing a bottle back and forth and talking in low voices. They were supposed to be alert. They were supposed to be watching. But it was cold and boring, and they were overconfident, certain that a town full of terrified shopkeepers posed no threat. Eva waited. Patience was the hunter's first virtue. She waited while they drank and talked while Vicente told some story about a woman in Denver, and Ox laughed his booming laugh. She waited until Ox stood and walked 20 feet away to relieve himself against the back wall of the building. Then she moved. Vicente never heard her coming. One moment he was alone with his bottle and his memories of Denver. The next a hand clamped over his mouth from behind while something hard cracked against the base of his skull. Not enough to kill, but enough to drop him into unconscious darkness. Ox turned from the wall, buttoning his pants, and froze at the sight of Vicente crumpled on the ground and a small figure standing in the shadows, absolutely still, absolutely silent. Who? He started reaching for the knife at his belt. Eva was faster. She had picked up Vicente's whiskey bottle, and now she hurled it with the accuracy of someone who had once put bullets through playing cards at 50 paces. The bottle caught Ox square in the forehead with a satisfying crack. He staggered, stunned, and before he could recover, Eva was on him. She was 58 years old and barely 5'6", and weighed perhaps 130 pounds soaking wet. Ox was 300 pounds of muscle and meanness. It should not have been a fair fight. It was not. Eva knew exactly where to strike, how to use leverage and momentum and the element of surprise. A knee to the groin that doubled him over, an elbow to the temple while he was bent, a precise strike to the nerve cluster at the side of his neck that shut his body down like someone had cut his strings. Ox dropped like a felled tree unconscious before he hit the ground. Eva stood over both men, breathing hard but steady, checking to make sure they were both still alive. She had not killed anyone in 22 years, and she was not about to start over these two idiots. But she needed them out of commission for at least an hour. She used their own belts to tie them, then dragged them into the shadows where they would not be immediately visible. The back door lock was simple, the kind that could be picked with a bent nail and patience. Eva had neither bent nail nor patience, so she simply used the knife she had taken from Vicente to jimmy the latch. The door opened with barely a whisper of sound. Inside the saloon was dark except for the lamplight bleeding under the door from the front room where Quick Jimmy stood guard. Eva could hear him, moving around the scrape of his chair, the clink of bottle against glass. The storage room was at the far end of a short hallway. Eva moved toward it, each step placed with surgical precision, weight distributed to avoid creaks, breathing slow and controlled. The door was locked from the outside, a simple sliding bolt. Eva pulled it back slowly, wincing at the tiny scrape of metal on metal that sounded like thunder in the silence. Inside, Annabelle sat on a pile of burlap sacks, her face tear-stained, her eyes wide with fear. When she saw Eva, her expression transformed from terror to confused hope. "Miss Eva," she whispered. Eva put a finger to her lips, then knelt beside the child, speaking barely above a breath. "We are leaving, child, but you must be absolutely silent. Can you do that for me?" Annabelle nodded, and Eva saw the trust there, the absolute faith that if Miss Eva said everything would be all right, then it would be. The weight of that trust settled on Eva's shoulders like a physical thing. She picked the girl up light as a bundle of kindling and started back toward the door. Quick Jimmy chose that moment to walk into the hallway. They saw each other at the same instant. Jimmy's hand dropped to his gun. Eva was holding Annabelle in both arms and had nothing except her wits and speed. Jimmy drew. Eva turned, putting her body between the gun and the child, knowing she was about to die, but determined that Annabelle would not. The gun came up level, aimed at Eva's chest, and stopped, because the door behind Jimmy had opened, and Tobias was standing there with a farrier's hammer raised above his head, and before Jimmy could turn, the hammer came down in a brutal arc that caught the young gunman at the base of the skull. Jimmy dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Eva stared at Toby, who was breathing hard, eyes wide with shock at what he had just done. "I followed you," he whispered. "I knew you were going to do something stupid and brave, and I could not let you do it alone." For the first time in 2 decades, Evangeline Thornfield felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away. "Smart boy," she said. "Now help me get her out before someone notices." They slipped out the back door past the still unconscious guards into the darkness of Shadow Creek's empty streets. Eva carried Annabelle to Dr. Aldridge's house and left her there with Constance, who asked no questions, just bundled the child inside and barred the door. By the time dawn broke and Luther discovered his prisoner missing and 3 of his men unconscious, Eva was back in her cabin, sitting in her rocking chair on her porch, sipping coffee as if she had never left. But Luther was not a stupid man, and when his men told him what had happened, how someone had taken down Vicente and Ox without a sound, had picked the lock like a professional, had moved through his operation like they were invisible, he began to suspect that Shadow Creek was not quite as helpless as it appeared. "Find out who did this," he told Cutter. "I want to know who in this town has those kinds of skills." And Cutter, who was smart and observant and had an excellent memory for faces and stories, started asking questions. Luther's rage that morning was something to behold, a volcanic eruption of shouting and threats and wild gestures that had his remaining men in backing away and the entire town cowering in their homes. He stood in the middle of Main Street, pistol drawn, firing shots into the air as he screamed his fury at the sky. "Who did this?" Silence. The kind of silence that comes when an entire community holds its breath. "Someone in this pathetic excuse for a town freed that girl. Someone made fools of my men." More silence. Luther turned in a slow circle, his gaze sweeping every building, every window, looking for any sign of defiance or satisfaction or guilt. He saw only fear, which was right and proper, but also the complete absence of any clue about who had struck his operation. Quick Jimmy sat on the saloon steps with his head in his hands, a lump the size of a goose egg rising from his skull. Ox and Vicente were both awake, but barely groaning, and nursing their wounds, humiliated beyond measure. "It was like fighting a ghost," Ox mumbled. "Came out of nowhere, hit me, gone before I could get my bearings." "The lock was picked," Vicente added, holding his aching head. "Professional job. Not just forced. Picked." That detail caught Cutter's attention. He had been examining the scene, cataloging clues, and now he looked at the lock with new eyes. Vicente was right. Someone with serious skills had opened that door, someone who knew what they were doing, who had training. "Boss," Cutter said quietly, pulling Luther aside, "we need to figure out who in this town has that kind of training." Luther's eyes narrowed. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking this town might not be as harmless as it looks. Someone here knows how to fight, how to move quiet, how to pick locks and disable guards. That is not farmer skills. That is not shopkeeper skills." "Then whose skills are they?" Cutter's mind was already working through possibilities, running through the roster of Shadow Creek's inhabitants that he had memorized during their approach. Miners, merchants, a doctor, a preacher, families. No one who stood out as a threat. "Except the old woman," Cutter said slowly. "The one who talked back to you yesterday." Luther snorted. "What the flower grower, Cutter? She has got to be 60 if she is a day." "Maybe. But did you see her eyes, the way she looked at you? No fear? None. And that thing she said about surviving worse than you. What if that was not just talk?" It sounded crazy even as Cutter said it, but something about the idea resonated. Luther had felt it too, that whisper of unease, that sense that Evangeline Thornfield was not what she appeared to be. "Find out," Luther ordered. "Ask around, quietly. I want to know everything about the widow." Cutter started with the saloon, buying drinks for the handful of old-timers who congregated there, even in the morning, men with loose tongues and looser memories. He asked casual questions, played the interested outsider, let the whiskey do its work. "That widow down the street," he said as if the thought had just occurred to him. "Thornfield, is it? She always lived here." 20 years now," one old-timer said, a former prospector named Jeb, who had been in Shadow Creek since the beginning. Showed up in '62, bought that lot, built her cabin, kept to herself mostly. Where she come from before that? Jeb shrugged. Never said. Folks do not ask too many questions out here. Woman wants a fresh start, we give it to her. She ever do anything interesting? Any trouble? Another old-timer, a man called Dutch, who had worked the mines until his lungs gave out, laughed. Eva, nah. She grows roses, sells preserves. About as exciting as watching paint dry. But there was something in the way they said it, a casualness that felt rehearsed, and Cutter had spent enough time reading people to know when they were protecting someone. Funny thing, Cutter said, pretending to study his whiskey. I knew a woman once years ago who looked a bit like her, deputy marshal down in New Mexico. Mean with a gun, Phantom they called her, Phantom Eva. The silence that followed was electric. Jeb and Dutch exchanged glances that lasted a heartbeat too long. That was a long time ago, Dutch said finally, and that woman would be dead by now. Marshal work is not exactly known for longevity. True enough, Cutter agreed, but he had his answer. He left the saloon and went back to Luther with his suspicions, and together they hatched a plan to test the widow to see if she was just a harmless old woman or something far more dangerous. Meanwhile, Eva sat in her cabin and knew they were coming. She had seen Cutter watching her, had noticed the questions being asked, had understood the moment Luther put the pieces together, that her disguise was cracking. She opened the trunk for the first time in 20 years. The gun belt lay coiled on top like a sleeping snake. Black leather worn soft with age and used silver conchos, tarnished but still catching the light. She lifted it out, feeling the weight of it, the way it settled in her hands like coming home. The Colt Peacemaker came next, the gun that had been her constant companion through 6 territories and 31 kills. Pearl grips with a silver raven engraved into the side, the barrel blued, and perfect the action smooth as silk, despite 2 decades of neglect. She had cleaned and oiled it every year on the anniversary of Josiah's death, a ritual of remembrance, never expecting to actually need it again. But here she was. The past refusing to stay buried. She lifted out the U.S. Marshal badge, next tarnished, and scratched the name, barely readable, E. Thornfield. She had worn this with pride once, had believed in what it represented, had thought that law and justice and protection meant something absolute and good. Then Josiah died, and she learned that badges were just metal and law was just a word, and justice was whatever you could carve out of an uncaring world with gun and will. The photograph showed a younger version of herself standing next to Josiah outside a marshal's office in Santa Fe, both of them in uniform, both armed, both looking at the camera with the casual confidence of people who knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of. Eva traced Josiah's face with one finger, remembering his laugh, his strength, the way he had loved her, without reservation or condition, accepting both the woman she was and the killer she could become. I know I promised, she whispered to the photograph. I know I said never again, but Josiah, they took a child. They are terrorizing innocents, and I cannot just stand by. I cannot. The image offered no response, but she had not expected one. The dead stayed dead, offering neither permission nor condemnation, leaving the living to make their own choices and live with their own consequences. Eva strapped on the gun belt for the first time in 22 years and was shocked at how natural it felt, how right, as if some fundamental part of herself had been missing and only now clicked back into place. She walked to the mirror and studied her reflection. Silver hair, lined face, eyes that had seen too much death and carried too many ghosts. But beneath the years and the disguise, the legend was still there. Still fast, still deadly, still willing to do what needed to be done when evil came calling. Luther's challenge arrived that afternoon, delivered by Quick Jimmy, who had recovered enough to walk, but still moved gingerly. Boss wants to see you, he said, standing on Eva's porch, refusing to meet her eyes. Tomorrow morning, dawn. You are going to show him how you freed that girl, show him the route you took. He says if it is as simple as you claim, he will let it go. Eva knew it was a trap, knew Luther intended to get her alone and test her, maybe kill her, definitely hurt her. She also knew she had no choice. If she refused, Luther would take his rage out on the town. If she ran, he would burn Shadow Creek to ash looking for her. Tell him I will be there, she said. Quick Jimmy nodded and left, and Eva went back inside to prepare for what was coming. That night, she visited Josiah's grave one final time, kneeling in the small cemetery at the edge of town, where a simple wooden cross marked his resting place. I am going to break my promise, she told him. I am going to become her again just for a little while, just long enough to make these men go away. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of pine and coming snow. I hope you understand. I hope wherever you are, you know I tried to be the woman you wanted me to be. I tried to put down the gun and live in peace." Her hand moved to the ribbon in her pocket, the one that had belonged to their daughter Grace, lost to cholera so many years ago, that sometimes Eva had trouble remembering her face clearly. "I tried," she repeated, "but some things will not stay buried, and I am one of them." She rose, touched the cross once more, and walked back to her cabin to wait for dawn. In the gang's camp north of town, Cutter sat by the fire and studied an old wanted poster he had pulled from his collection. The paper was yellowed and brittle, the ink faded, but the face was unmistakable even across 20 years in the erosion of age. Phantom Eva. Wanted for the killing of 31 outlaws. Suspected former U.S. Marshal. Disappeared 1860. Presumed dead, except she was not dead. She was in Shadow Creek, and tomorrow Luther was going to find out exactly what kind of mistake he had made when he chose this particular town to terrorize. Cutter folded the poster carefully and tucked it away, then checked his Sharps rifle one more time, making sure it was clean and loaded and ready. Because he had a feeling tomorrow was going to be the kind of day that separated survivors from corpses, and he wanted to make damn sure he ended up in the former category. Dawn could not come fast enough. Dawn broke cold and clear over Shadow Creek, the kind of morning where breath misted in the air, and frost painted every surface with delicate crystal patterns that would melt away within the hour. Eva stood on her porch watching the sun climb above the eastern ridge, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she contemplated what the day would bring. She wore riding clothes, practical trousers, and a heavy wool shirt that had belonged to Josiah Boots, with good grip, a duster coat that hung to her knees and concealed the gun belt strapped around her waist. Her hair was pulled back tight and covered with a dark scarf. She looked like what she was, an older woman preparing for a hard ride in rough country. What she did not look like was a killer preparing for potential combat. That was intentional. Luther and 5 of his men arrived as the church bell tolled, 6 their horses fresh and eager, the men themselves looking confident and predatory. Luther rode his black gelding, flanked by Cutter on a rangy sorrel ox, on a draft horse that could actually carry his weight, Vicente on a compact Mustang, Quick Jimmy on a showy paint, and a man Eva had not seen before, someone they called Dutch Pete, who wore 2 guns and had the dead eyes of a man who killed for pleasure rather than profit. "Morning, Widow Thornfield," Luther called out, his voice carrying false cheer. "Ready for our little ride?" Eva set down her coffee cup and walked to where her own horse waited, a sturdy bay mare named Patience that she had owned for 15 years. The horse was old but reliable, with the kind of steady temperament that did not spook easily and could cover ground all day without complaint. She mounted with a fluid grace that made Luther's eyebrows rise slightly. Most women in their late 50s needed help getting into a saddle, needed a mounting block or a strong arm to boost them up. Eva simply put her foot in the stirrup and swung aboard like she had been doing it every day of her life, which for a long stretch of years she had. "Where we headed?" Luther asked as they started north out of town. "Broken Tooth Canyon," Eva replied. "About an hour ride. That is where I circled back that night to approach the saloon from the west." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Broken Tooth Canyon was a landmark everyone in the area knew, a narrow ravine cut by centuries of runoff. It was also, as Luther had already noted, a perfect place for an ambush. They rode in silence for the first half hour, the only sounds the creak of leather and jingle of tack and the steady rhythm of hooves on hard ground. Eva kept Patience to a walking pace, letting the younger horses set the speed, conserving energy, because she had a feeling she was going to need every reserve before this day ended. She was acutely aware of Cutter riding slightly behind, and to her right, his eyes never leaving her, studying every movement she made with the intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle. He was the smart one, the dangerous one, the man who would figure out the truth if she gave him enough clues. So she gave him nothing. Sat her saddle like any competent rider, guided her horse with casual skill, showed no signs of the tactical awareness that was cataloging escape routes and defensive positions and fields of fire with every passing mile. Luther kept up a running commentary, part interrogation, disguised as friendly conversation, part psychological warfare, designed to unsettle and intimidate. "You ride well for a woman your age," he said. "Most old birds I know can barely walk without a cane, let alone handle a horse." "I have been riding since I was a child," Eva replied calmly. "Some skills you never lose." "Where you from originally? You got a bit of an accent I cannot quite place." "Here and there. I moved around a lot when I was younger." "Doing what?" "Living. Same as everyone." The evasions were deliberate, calculated to seem like simple privacy rather than active concealment. Most people had parts of their past they preferred not to discuss, especially out here, where fresh starts and new beginnings were common currency. But Cutter was not buying it. Eva could feel his suspicion like a physical weight pressing against her back. They reached Broken Tooth Canyon just as the sun cleared the mountains, flooding the ravine with golden light that turned the red rock walls into something almost beautiful. The canyon entrance was perhaps 30 feet wide, the walls rising 60 feet on either side, sheer and unclimbable. It was as Eva had known it would be a perfect kill box if someone wanted to trap riders inside. She dismounted and walked into the canyon, letting Luther and his men follow. Their horses' hooves echoed off the walls, amplifying every sound, creating acoustic confusion that would make it hard to pinpoint the source of gunfire if shooting started. "This is where you came that night?" Luther asked, skepticism clear in his tone. "I circled wide," Eva said, walking deeper into the canyon, playing her role. "Came in from the west side of town where the shadows were thickest. This ravine runs parallel to the main road for about a mile before it opens up near the creek." It was all true geography, which made the lie more convincing. She led them perhaps 200 yards in to where it dog-legged sharply to the left, and there she stopped and turned to face them. "And this," Luther said, his voice hardening, "is where you are going to tell me the truth." Eva met his gaze without flinching. "I have been telling you the truth." "No," Cutter said, urging his horse forward. "You have been telling us a story. A good story, I will give you that, but not the truth." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the wanted poster, unfolding it with deliberate slowness, holding it up so Eva could see her own face staring back at her across 22 years of distance. "Phantom Eva," Cutter read, "wanted for the killing of 31 outlaws, last seen 1860 in New Mexico territory, presumed dead." The silence that followed was absolute. Eva looked at the poster, then at Cutter, then at Luther, and for just a moment she allowed herself to drop the mask to let them see the woman underneath the widow's disguise. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly. "So it is you," Luther breathed, and Eva could hear the mixture of fear and greed in his voice. Fear because he had just realized he had been threatening a legitimate legend. Greed because legends were worth money, serious money, to the right collectors. "It was me," Eva corrected. "Past tense, that woman died when her husband did. I am just a widow now, just someone who wants to be left in peace." "Peace," Luther laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "You killed 3 of my best men, freed a hostage, made fools of us in front of that whole town, and you want peace." "I did what I had to do to protect a child. Nothing more." Cutter was shaking his head, that wanted poster still in his hand. "Boss, do you know what she is worth? There are collectors in San Francisco who would pay $10,000 for her alive. 20,000 if we bring proof she is really her." Eva felt the situation shifting, saw the calculation in Luther's eyes as he weighed options. Kill her here and take the body as proof, or take her alive and try to transport her to California for a bigger payday. Either way, she was no longer a nuisance to be dealt with. She was a prize to be claimed. "Here is how this is going to work," Luther said, drawing his ornate Navy Colt. "You are going to surrender your weapons nice and slow, and then you are going to come back to camp with us. We will send word to our contacts in San Francisco, arrange a sale, and everyone walks away richer." "And if I refuse," Eva asked, "then we kill you here and drag your corpse back anyway. Worth less dead, but still worth something." Eva stood perfectly still, her hands at her sides, apparently weighing her options. In truth, she was counting. 6 men, 12 visible guns, probably another 6 hidden. Cutter had his Sharps rifle, a devastating weapon at any range. Ox had a shotgun across his saddle. The others all carried revolvers. 6 against 1 in a canyon with limited cover with her back to a dead end. The old Eva the legend would have assessed these odds and made her move regardless, trusting speed and skill, and the simple fact that most men hesitated for a critical half-second before shooting a woman. But Eva was 58 years old now, and while her draw was still fast and her aim still true, she could not count on her body responding the way it had at 30. Age was not wisdom's only gift. It also brought limitations that no amount of experience could overcome. So she did what she had learned to do in 2 decades of hunting the frontier's worst. She changed the rules. "You are making a mistake," she said, her voice calm and conversational. "I do not think so," Luther replied. "See, you are assuming I came out here alone." That stopped him. "What? You think I did not know this was a trap? You think I did not prepare?" It was a complete bluff, but Eva delivered it with such absolute confidence that she saw doubt flicker across Luther's face. Cutter was smarter. "She is lying. Nobody followed us. I was watching." "Were you watching the ridges?" Eva asked, letting her gaze drift upward to the canyon walls. Because that is where I would position riflemen if I wanted to ensure my safety during a meeting with hostile forces. All 6 men looked up involuntarily, scanning the empty rocks above them, and in that moment of distraction, Eva drew. The Colt Peacemaker cleared leather faster than thought, the pearl grip settling into her hand like it had been waiting there all along, and she fired 4 shots in the space of 2 heartbeats. Not to kill. Not yet. The first bullet took Luther's hat clean off his head, the ornate Stetson spinning away into the canyon shadows. The second shot caught Vicente's pistol just as he was drawing it, the impact sending the weapon flying from his hand with enough force that Eva heard bones break. The third round shattered the scope on Cutter's Sharp's rifle, sending a spray of glass into his face that made him cry out and rear back in his saddle. The fourth and final shot hit the buckle on Ox's belt dead center, the heavy metal exploding into fragments that made the big man yelp and grab at his falling trousers. 4 shots, 4 hits. Less than 2 seconds elapsed. Eva stood with the Colt still smoking in her hand, aimed now at Luther's chest, and when she spoke, her voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had done this dance many times before and always walked away. That was mercy, she said. The next 4 bullets go into flesh instead of metal. Your choice. Ride away now or find out if the legend has lost her touch in 20 years. The silence that followed was broken only by Cutter's cursing as he tried to wipe glass shards from his eyes and Vicente's whimpering as he cradled his broken hand. Luther stared at her, his face pale beneath his tan, and Eva could see him running the same calculations she had run moments before. 6 men against 1 woman should be easy odds. But those 4 shots had just demonstrated that this was not a normal woman, and that easy odds could turn deadly real fast when you were facing someone who moved and shot like a ghost. Quick Jimmy, young and stupid, and eager to prove himself, went for his gun anyway. Eva's 5th shot took him through the shoulder, spinning him out of his saddle with a scream that echoed off the canyon walls like the cry of a damned soul. Anyone else? Eva asked, her gun now tracking between the remaining men with mechanical precision. Ox, struggling to hold up his pants with one hand, raised the other in surrender. I am out. I am done. Dutch Pete, the man with the dead eyes, was smarter than Jimmy, but not smart enough to know when he was beaten. His hands drifted toward his guns. Do not, Eva said, and something in her tone made him freeze. I have put 31 men in the ground. I do not want to make it 32. But I will if you force my hand. Dutch Pete's hands came up slowly. Cutter, one eye swollen shut from glass cuts, managed to speak through his pain. Boss, we need to pull back, regroup. Luther's pride warred with his survival instinct, and for a long moment Eva thought pride would win, thought she was going to have to kill him, right there in that canyon, and deal with whatever consequences followed. Then he nodded slowly, backing his horse away from her hands, visible and empty. This is not over, he said. Yes, it is, Eva replied. You just do not know it yet. Leave Shadow Creek, take your men, ride out before sunset. If I see any of you in that town after dark, I will finish what we started here. You cannot protect that whole town, Luther said, not alone. Try me. They stared at each other across 20 feet of dusty ground, and what Luther saw in Eva's calm eyes made him look away first. Mount up, he ordered his men. We are leaving. They collected Quick Jimmy, who was still conscious but bleeding heavily from his shoulder wound, and Vicente, who cradled his shattered hand and glared at Eva with pure hatred. They turned their horses and rode back the way they had come. Luther in the lead, the others following in stunned silence. Eva watched them go, her gun still drawn, not holstering it until they had disappeared around the canyon's bend and the sound of hooves had faded completely. Only then did she allow herself to breathe, to feel the trembling in her hands, the spike of adrenaline that made her heart race and her vision sharpen to crystal clarity. She had not killed anyone. That was good. That was important. She was not the woman who dealt death as casually as other people dealt cards. She was someone who protected, who defended, who gave mercy even to those who probably did not deserve it. But she had also just declared war on Luther Harker and his gang, and wars had a way of escalating regardless of intentions. She holstered the Peacemaker, mounted Patience, and rode back toward Shadow Creek, knowing that the hard part was still ahead. Eva returned to find the entire town gathered in the street, every soul in Shadow Creek standing in clusters, whispering and pointing as she rode down Main Street at an easy walk. Word had already spread. Cutter had made sure of that before he and Luther pulled out. The crowd parted for her like water around a stone, faces showing everything from awe to fear to confusion to anger. She dismounted in front of Muller's store and tied Patience to the rail, then turned to face the assembled community. Cutter stood on the store's porch, that wanted poster in his hand, and he held it up for everyone to see. "Your widow is not who you think she is," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathered crowd. "This is Phantom Eva, wanted for killing 31 outlaws, most dangerous woman who ever wore a badge in 4 territories." The murmuring grew louder, a buzz of shock and disbelief. "She has been lying to you for 20 years, Cutter continued, "playing the harmless old woman while hiding a past soaked in blood." Eva said nothing, just stood there and let him speak, because everything he said was true, and denying it would only make things worse. Klaus Miller pushed forward, his face pale. "Eva, is this true?" Before she could answer, Reverend Matthias Stonewell emerged from the crowd, his voice cutting through the noise with the authority of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "I have known Eva's secret for 20 years, he said, and the crowd fell silent. "She came to Shadow Creek in 1862, broken and seeking peace. She confided in me, asked for sanctuary, and I gave it because I believed then, and I believe now, that people deserve second chances." He walked to stand beside Eva, a gesture of solidarity that made her throat tighten with gratitude. "In those 20 years, she has been nothing but a blessing to this community. She has helped birth babies, buried our dead, fed the hungry, comforted the grieving. The woman who stands before you today is not the killer from those old wanted posters. She is the woman who saved Annabelle Pritchard. She is the woman who faced down Luther Harker this morning and sent him running." Toby pushed through the crowd next, his young face set with determination. "Aunt Eva raised me for 3 years when I had nobody, fed me, clothed me, taught me right from wrong. I do not care what she did before I knew her. I care about who she is now, and she is good." Dr. Constance Aldridge joined them, Annabelle holding her hand. The child broke free and ran to Eva, wrapping small arms around the older woman's waist. "Miss Eva saved me," Annabelle said, her voice small but clear. "The bad man locked me up and she came and got me out. She is a hero." The mood of the crowd shifted, uncertainty replacing immediate condemnation. But there were still angry voices, still people who saw only the killer and not the woman who had transcended that past. "She is a murderer," someone shouted from the back. "She killed to protect innocent people," Constance shot back. "There is a difference. How do we know she will not turn on us? Once a killer, always a killer." Eva finally spoke, her voice quiet but carrying in the tense silence. "I understand your fear. I do. You have every right to be suspicious of me, to question whether I can be trusted. All I can tell you is this." She paused, meeting as many eyes as she could. "Everything Reverend Stonewell said is true. I was that woman. I killed 31 men over the course of 6 years. Every single one was trying to kill me or innocent people first. Every single one still haunts my dreams." Her hand moved unconsciously to the gun at her hip. "My husband, Josiah Thornfield, was a United States Marshal. He taught me to shoot, to track, to fight. We hunted the worst criminals the frontier had to offer. We believed we were making the world safer, bringing justice to lawless places." Her voice grew softer, weighted with old grief. "Then the Ketchum gang ambushed us outside Socorro. They killed Josiah, shot him 3 times while I watched. I survived, killed 12 of them in the fight that followed, spent the next 2 years hunting down the rest." The crowd was completely silent now, listening. When it was over, when they were all dead and Josiah was still in the ground, I realized revenge had solved nothing, had not brought him back, had not healed my grief, had just added more ghosts to my nightmares. She looked at Annabelle, still clinging to her. "So I came here, buried my guns, tried to be someone different, someone better. For 20 years I succeeded. I was just a widow who grew roses. Until Luther Harker came to town and took a child hostage. Until evil demanded a response that roses and prayers could not provide." She straightened, her voice growing stronger. "I am not asking you to forgive my past. I am not even asking you to accept me. I am simply telling you that I will do everything in my power to protect this town from those men. Not because I want to kill again, but because you deserve to live without fear. Because Annabelle deserves to grow up safe. Because sometimes the only thing that stops bad men with guns is a good woman who knows how to use one." The debate that followed was heated and prolonged. Some argued she should leave, that her presence would bring more violence. Others insisted she was their only hope against the Harker Gang. They voted a show of hands, and the result was close but decisive. 140 for allowing Eva to stay and fight, 85 against, 55 abstaining. Mueller, acting as mayor, made it official. "Eva Thornfield, or whatever your real name is, you have permission to remain in Shadow Creek and to defend this town as you see fit." Eva nodded her acceptance. Thank you, but I need to be clear about something. I am 58 years old. My draw is still fast. My aim is still true. But I cannot fight 12 men alone and expect to win. I need help. Toby stepped forward immediately. I will fight. You do not know how, Eva said gently. Then teach me. You have got, maybe 36 hours before Luther comes back with his whole gang. Teach me what you can in that time. 3 more men stepped forward, miners with hunting rifles, and the kind of desperate courage that comes when you realize running is not an option. Then 2 more, then another. By the time the volunteers stopped coming, Eva had 9 fighters, including herself. Not enough to match Luther's gang in a straight fight, but enough to work with if she could turn Shadow Creek itself into a weapon. All right, she said, looking at her ragtag militia. We have got a lot of work to do and not much time. Let me tell you how we are going to survive this. Eva gathered her volunteers in the church, the largest enclosed space available, and began their education with a simple truth. Forget everything you think you know about gunfighting from dime novels, she said, pacing in front of them like a drill sergeant addressing recruits. The quick draw, the showdown at high noon, one man against another in the street. That is theater, entertainment. It has almost nothing to do with real combat. She drew her peacemaker, the motion still fast enough to make several men flinch, and held it up for them to see. This is a tool, like a hammer or a saw. It has one purpose: to put holes in things you aim it at. Being fast is good, but being accurate is better. And being smart is best of all. For the next 12 hours, Eva ran them through the fundamentals: grip, stance, sight, picture, trigger control. Most of them could not hit a stationary target at 20 feet. She did not try to turn them into marksmen. She just tried to teach them enough to not accidentally shoot each other or waste ammunition firing wildly into the air. Slow is smooth, she repeated over and over. Smooth is fast. Do not rush the shot. Breathe, aim, squeeze. The target is not going anywhere. Between shooting drills, she taught tactics: cover versus concealment, fields of fire, crossfire lanes, how to use terrain and structures to multiply force, how to avoid silhouetting yourself against light, how to move between positions without exposing yourself unnecessarily. Toby soaked it up like a desert soaking rain, his young mind quick and eager. The older miners struggled more, their bodies slower to respond, their minds less flexible. But they tried. That counted for something. Eva positioned them throughout the town based on their skills and limitations. Reverend Stonewell, who had sharp eyes and steady hands despite his age, went to the church tower with a rifle and instructions to call out enemy positions using the church bell as a signal system. 1 ring for movement from the north, 2 for east, 3 for south, 4 for west. Toby and 2 of the stronger miners took the 2nd floor of Muller's store, which offered excellent overlapping fields of fire down Main Street and strong cover behind thick walls. They had rifles and spare ammunition and instructions to focus on suppressing enemy movement rather than going for kills. Dr. Aldridge's office became the aid station, reinforced with sandbags taken from the mine and equipped with medical supplies, water, and an escape route through the back if the position became untenable. The saloon rooftop got 2 more miners with rifles positioned to cover the eastern approach. Eva herself would be mobile, moving between positions using her speed and experience to hit the enemy where they were weakest, to disrupt their attacks, to be the wild card that Luther could not predict or counter. We do not try to match them gun for gun, she explained. We use the town itself as a weapon. Force them to come to us. Make them pay for every foot of ground. Bleed them until they decide the cost is too high and pull back. And if they do not pull back, one miner asked, then we make them regret staying. During a break in training, while the men rested and tried to process everything they had learned, Eva found herself alone with Reverend Stonewell in the empty church. You are taking a terrible risk, Matthias said quietly. I know. Not just with your life, with your soul. You worked so hard to leave violence behind, and now you are walking straight back into it. Eva looked at the simple wooden cross above the altar, remembering all the Sundays she had sat in that 3rd pew and tried to believe in redemption and second chances and the possibility that people could change. Josiah used to say that some situations do not have good solutions, only less bad ones. This is one of those situations. She told him then, sitting in that quiet church with afternoon light streaming through the windows, more of the story she had not shared with the town. She had met Josiah Thornfield in 1854 in Santa Fe, where she had been working as a translator. Her mother had been French, her father a trapper, and Eva had grown up speaking multiple languages and moving between worlds. Josiah was a newly appointed U.S. Marshal, 34 years old, serious and dedicated and immediately smitten with the 30-year-old woman who could ride and shoot and speak 3 languages. They married in 1855, a small ceremony attended by fellow marshals and Eva's few friends. The work took them across New Mexico and Arizona territories, hunting outlaws and bringing law to places where none existed. Eva had learned to shoot from necessity. Female marshals were rare but not unheard of, and Josiah insisted she be able to defend herself. She discovered she had a gift for it, the same kind of natural aptitude some people had for music or mathematics. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp, her mind calm under pressure. Josiah taught her his philosophy: peace through strength, mercy through wisdom. We do not go looking for fights, but when evil forces our hand, we respond with overwhelming competence. We offer mercy when we can, we deliver justice when we must, and we never ever kill unless there is no other choice. For 6 years, they were partners in the truest sense. They hunted together, fought together, built a reputation together. The legend grew because she could move through hostile territory like smoke could appear behind an outlaw before he knew she was there, could put 3 bullets in the same hole at 50 paces. 31 confirmed kills across those 6 years. Each one documented, each one investigated, each one ruled justified by territorial courts or military tribunals. Then came 1860 and the Ketchum Gang. Eva's voice faltered as she told Matthias about that day, about the ambush outside Socorro, about watching Josiah take 3 bullets while she was pinned down and helpless, about the rage that consumed her when he died in her arms, his last words a plea for her to live, to not let revenge consume her. She had not listened to that plea. Not at first. For 2 years, she hunted the remaining Ketchum Gang members with single-minded obsession. Tracked them across territories, killed them one by one, not always cleanly, not always quickly. The woman who had believed in mercy and justice became something harder, colder, more efficient. Until 1862, when she cornered the last 3 Ketchum brothers in Tucson and realized that killing them had not brought Josiah back, had not healed her grief, had just left her hollow and haunted and alone. She walked away that night, left her badge on the marshal's desk in Santa Fe, rode north until she found Shadow Creek and decided to stop running. I buried the guns, she told Matthias. Tried to bury that part of myself with them. For 20 years I succeeded. I was just Eva Thornfield, widow and gardener, and harmless old woman. But she was always there. Monsieur Matthias said, waiting. Yes, and now I need her again. Just for a little while. Just long enough to save these people. The old minister was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Josiah told you peace through strength, mercy through wisdom. You gave Luther mercy this morning. You let him and his men ride away when you could have killed them. I did. That is not the old you. That is Evangeline Thornfield, a woman who has learned that there are things worse than dying and things better than killing. Eva felt something loosen in her chest, some tension she had been carrying since the moment she strapped on that gun belt. Thank you, she whispered. They sat together in comfortable silence until the church bell told the hour, and Eva rose to continue training her unlikely militia. Dusk was falling when the lone rider appeared on the southern ridge approaching Shadow Creek under a white flag fashioned from what looked like a torn shirt. The townspeople, now on high alert, noticed immediately, and word spread fast. Eva was on the church tower with Reverend Stonewell checking sightlines and angles when someone called up that a stranger was coming. She grabbed a spyglass and studied the approaching figure. Male, maybe late 40s, riding a paint horse with easy confidence. Wearing what looked like an old Confederate cavalry coat, faded gray, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. No visible weapons drawn, though she spotted a rifle scabbard and at least 2 pistols. He stopped at the edge of town, still holding that makeshift white flag, and called out in a voice trained to carry across battlefields. I am looking for Evangeline Thornfield. I mean no harm, just want to talk. Eva descended the tower and walked out to meet him, her hand near her gun, but not on it, Toby and 2 armed miners following at a discreet distance in case this was some kind of trap. The stranger dismounted as she approached, and she got her first good look at him. Weathered face, gray, shot beard eyes that had seen hard country and hard times. Scars on his hands that spoke of manual labor and violence in equal measure. He moved like a fighter, weight-balanced, hands ready. State your business, Eva said, stopping 10 feet away. Name is Ezekiel Hammond. People call me Zeke. I served as a scout during the war, Confederate side, mostly cavalry reconnaissance. Since then, I have been working as a guide tracker, whatever honest work I can find. That does not answer my question. Zeke looked uncomfortable. I came to warn you, and maybe help if you will have me. Warn me about what? About who is really behind Luther Harker and his gang. Eva felt cold fingers trace down her spine. Explain. Can we talk somewhere private? This is not information you want shared in front of the whole town. Eva considered studying him for signs of deception. He met her gaze steadily, and something in his eyes reminded her of Josiah, that quality of earnest integrity that was hard to fake. All right, my cabin, but my friends stay close. They walked to Eva's small home, Toby and the miners positioning themselves outside, and Eva let Zeke inside while she remained near the door ready to draw if this turned out to be a mistake. Zeke removed his hat, turning it in his hands nervously. I knew your husband, he said without preamble. Josiah Thornfield. Eva's hand moved closer to her gun. Josiah never mentioned anyone named Ezekiel Hammond. That is because we only met once, and it was not exactly under friendly circumstances. 1862, I was scouting for General Sibley's column in New Mexico. Your husband caught me alone, had me dead to rights. Could have shot me or arrested me. But he did not. No, ma'am. He looked at me for a long minute, then said, War is almost over. You seem like a decent man who made poor choices. Go home to your family. Live a better life. Then he let me go. Zeke's voice grew thick with emotion. I never forgot that, Mercy. Went home to Texas after the war, like he said. Got married, worked an honest job, raised 2 sons. When my wife died 3 years back, I started drifting again, ended up working as a tracker for hire. He looked directly at Eva. 2 months ago, a man approached me in El Paso, wanted me to help find someone, offered serious money. I took the job not knowing what I was getting into. Let me guess, Eva said coldly. He wanted you to find me. Yes, ma'am. Man named Beauregard Ketchum. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Eva grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. That is impossible. I killed all the Ketchum brothers, Clayton, Silas, and Thomas, 1862 in Tucson. You killed the 3 oldest, Zeke said gently, but there was a 4th. Beauregard was only 16 at the time, too young to ride with the gang. He was back at their hideout running supplies when you caught up with his brothers. Eva sank into the chair, her mind reeling. A 4th brother. All these years and she had never known. When Beau came back and found his brothers dead, he swore revenge. Spent the last 20 years hunting for you. Finally got a lead that you might be in Montana territory. Hired me to track you down. Why are you telling me this? Zeke met her eyes. Because when I figured out who you were and what was happening, I realized Beau was not interested in justice. He was interested in revenge. Slow revenge. He is using Luther Harker as a blunt instrument to soften you up, to hurt you emotionally by threatening this town you have come to care about. Where is he now? Camped about 10 miles north with 25 more men. The plan is to let Luther attack Shadow Creek, let you exhaust yourself, defending it, and then Beau sweeps in to finish the job when you are weakest. Eva processed this, her tactical mind already adjusting for the new threat. 12 men in Luther's gang plus 25 with Beau meant 37 total enemies. Even with her skills and the town's defenders, those were impossible odds in a straight fight. Why are you helping me? She asked. Beau is paying you. Because I owe Josiah Thornfield my life, and because revenge served cold for 20 years is not justice, it is just poison. Beau has let hatred consume him. I will not be part of that. Eva studied him for a long moment, then made her decision. Trust was always a risk, but Zeke's story had the ring of truth, and she needed any advantage she could get. If you want to help, I can use a good scout and tracker. Zeke nodded slowly. I will do whatever you need, for Josiah's memory. They spent the next hour planning, Eva sharing her defensive strategy, while Zeke contributed tactical insights from his cavalry days. He was smart, experienced, and most importantly, he understood how to fight against superior numbers by using terrain and preparation. By the time they finished, Eva had a clearer picture of what was coming and a slightly better chance of surviving it, but only slightly. Night fell over Shadow Creek like a shroud, the temperature dropping toward freezing stars emerging in a sky so clear and vast, it felt like you could fall up into it forever. Eva stood on her porch wrapped in a heavy coat, watching the darkness and thinking about how the day after tomorrow would likely end. Either she would be dead, or Luther and Beau would be dead, or some combination thereof. There did not seem to be a middle ground, no scenario where everyone walked away breathing. She was 58 years old and tired of killing, but killing was coming, whether she wanted it or not. Toby joined her, bringing coffee that steamed in the cold air. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. Are we going to die? He asked finally, his young voice trying for bravery and almost achieving it. Maybe, Eva said honestly. Probably not all of us, but Maybe some. Maybe me. That is not very encouraging. I will not lie to you, Toby. What is coming is going to be bad. But we have a chance. A real chance. If everyone does their job, if we keep our heads, if luck favors us even a little, we can survive this. And after, assuming there is an after, Eva sipped her coffee, considering. After, I suppose I will go back to being the widow who grows roses. Or maybe I will not be able to pretend anymore. Maybe this is who I really am instead of who I wanted to be. Would that be so terrible? I do not know. Ask me when this is over. They heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Zeke walking up the path, his face grim in the starlight. Bad news, he said without preamble. I rode out to check on Beau's position. He is moving up his timetable. Plans to have Luther attack tomorrow at dawn, then sweep in with his own force right after. Tomorrow, Eva felt her stomach drop. We are not ready. Ready or not, it is coming. Beau must have gotten word about what happened in the canyon. Knows you are onto him. Wants to hit before you can prepare more. Eva's mind raced, recalculating, adjusting. Less than 12 hours until the attack. Her militia barely trained. Defenses incomplete. Ammunition limited. This was going to be a slaughter. Unless. Zeke, she said slowly, an idea forming. You said Beau does not know you switched sides. Far as he knows, I am still working for him. Then you can walk into his camp without raising suspicion. I suppose. What are you thinking? Eva smiled, and it was the cold, calculating smile of the legend, the woman who had survived 6 years of hunting the frontier's worst by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than everyone who came against her. I am thinking that when you are outnumbered, you change the rules. We do not wait for them to attack us. We attack them. Tonight, while they are sleeping and unprepared. Toby stared at her. That is crazy. We are not soldiers. No, Eva agreed. But I am, and Zeke is. And with the element of surprise, 2 professionals can do a lot of damage to a camp full of overconfident outlaws. She looked at Zeke. You in? He grinned, and 20 years fell away from his weathered face. For Josiah, hell, yes, I am in. Good. Get your gear. We ride in 2 hours. Time to show these men that some legends never die. The moon hung low and bloated above the Montana wilderness, painting the landscape in shades of silver and shadow, as Eva and Zeke rode north toward the outlaw camp. They moved in silence, communicating through hand signals learned in different wars, but speaking the same language of violence and tactics that transcended allegiance. Eva had left Toby in command of Shadow Creek's defenses with strict instructions. If she and Zeke did not return by dawn, assume the worst and prepare for Luther's attack. The young man had wanted to come, had argued that she should not face this alone, but Eva had been firm. Someone needed to coordinate the town's defense if this gambit failed, and Toby was the only one besides her who understood the plan well enough to execute it. They covered the 10 miles in just under 2 hours, pushing their horses hard across terrain that would have been treacherous in full darkness, but was navigable under the moon's cold light. As they approached the camp, Eva and Zeke dismounted and tied their horses in a copse of cottonwoods, then proceeded on foot. The outlaw camp sprawled across a meadow protected on 3 sides by rocky outcroppings, with a small stream providing water and a cluster of fires providing warmth against the mountain cold. Eva counted roughly 28 men, some sleeping in bedrolls, others sitting around fires passing bottles and playing cards, a handful standing sentry duty with the kind of casual inattention that spoke to overconfidence. They expected no threat. Why would they? Shadow Creek was a town of shopkeepers and miners, not fighters. And the legend, famous or not, was still just one old woman. Their mistake. Zeke pointed to the largest tent at the camp's center, set apart from the others. That would be Beauregard Ketchum's command post. Eva nodded, understanding, then gestured toward the horse line, where perhaps 40 animals stood, hobbled and drowsing. Their plan was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Stampede the horses to create chaos and eliminate the outlaws' mobility. In the confusion, eliminate as many threats as possible without engaging in direct combat. Force Beau to either commit his forces immediately in a disorganized rush or pull back to regroup, buying Shadow Creek precious time. Eva circled wide to approach the horse line from downwind, while Zeke moved toward the perimeter, where he could provide covering fire if things went sideways. She counted her steps, controlled her breathing, became the phantom she had been named for, moving through the darkness like she was part of it. The horses sensed her before the guards did, ears pricking forward, a few nervous whickers, breaking the night's quiet. Eva was already among them, cutting hobbles with quick slashes of her knife, whispering soothing nonsense in French, the way her mother had taught her, keeping them calm, even as she freed them. When half the herd was loose, she pulled a small pouch from her coat and scattered its contents upwind. The horses caught the scent of wolf musk, something Eva had prepared back in Shadow Creek, knowing it would trigger their flight instinct. Their eyes rolled, white nostrils, flaring muscles bunching. Eva fired her peacemaker twice into the air. The herd exploded into panicked motion, 40 horses stampeding through the camp in a thundering avalanche of hooves and screaming chaos. Men dove from bedrolls, scrambled away from fires, shouted warnings that were lost in the din. The horses trampled tents, scattered gear, created exactly the kind of confusion Eva had been counting on. She moved with the herd using the stampede as cover, and when she emerged from the dust and darkness, she was inside the camp's perimeter with every advantage that surprise could offer. A sentry turned toward her, rifle rising. Eva shot him through the shoulder, a precise wound that put him down without killing him. Another guard came running from the left. She dropped him with a shot to the leg. Mercy where possible, but ruthless efficiency when needed. Zeke opened fire from his position on the perimeter, his rifle cracking in measured cadence, each shot finding a target. Not to kill, but to wound, to create panic, to make the outlaws believe they were under assault by a much larger force. Luther Harker emerged from his tent, shirtless and furious, his ornate navy Colts in hand. He spotted Eva through the chaos, and his eyes went wide with recognition and rage. "You," he roared, bringing both guns to bear. Eva was faster. Her first shot took his right hand, Colt sending it spinning away. Her second shot punched through his left shoulder, spinning him around. He fell cursing, and Eva advanced on him with her gun aimed at his head. "I told you to leave Shadow Creek," she said coldly. "You should have listened." Before she could say more, the large tent's flap tore open, and a man emerged who stopped Eva's breath in her chest. Beauregard Ketchum was 36 years old but looked older, his face carved by weather and obsession into something harder than the rock around them. He had his brother's eyes, the same cold gray that Eva remembered from that day in Tucson 22 years ago when she had killed Clayton, Silas, and Thomas. "Phantom Eva," he said, and his voice carried a lifetime of hatred compressed into 3 syllables. Finally, face to face. He was not holding a gun. Instead, he held something that made Eva's blood turn to ice. A photograph. Even from 20 feet away, she recognized it. Young Eva and Josiah in their marshal uniforms outside the Santa Fe office. The same photograph she kept hidden in her cabin. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. "From your cabin. I had men watching Shadow Creek for weeks, waiting for the right moment. They broke in while you were out playing teacher to those miners. Found this, found a lot of things." He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had dreamed of this moment for 2 decades. "You took everything from me, my brothers, my family, my future. Tonight I take everything from you." Beau raised his left hand and fired a flare gun into the sky. The signal bloomed red against the stars, and from the darkness surrounding the camp came answering movement. Not 25 men as Zeke had estimated. More. Perhaps 15 more hidden in positions Eva had not scouted, waiting for exactly this scenario. 43 outlaws total, and Eva was standing in the middle of their camp. "Did you really think I would not anticipate you trying something clever?" Beau asked, advancing slowly. "I have spent 20 years studying you, learning your tactics, understanding how you think. You always strike first when outnumbered. You always change the rules." He gestured at the surrounding darkness where his reinforcements were closing in. "So I changed them first." Eva's mind raced through options, all of them bad. She was surrounded, exposed, with perhaps 30 seconds before the trap closed completely. Zeke was out there somewhere, but one rifle against 43 men was meaningless. She had made a catastrophic mistake, and it was going to cost her everything. Unless she made one more play, one last change to the rules. Eva holstered her peacemaker. The gesture froze everyone, Beau included. It was so unexpected, so contrary to survival instinct, that for a moment no one knew how to respond. "What are you doing?" Beau asked. "Making you an offer," Eva said, her voice carrying across the camp. "You want me, you want revenge for your brothers. I understand that. I killed them. That is a debt that needs settling." She spread her hands, showing she was unarmed, now vulnerable. "So here is the deal. Let Shadow Creek go. Pull your men back. Leave those people alone, and you can have me. No fight, no resistance. Whatever punishment you think I deserve, I will accept it." Beau stared at her. "You are serious." "Completely. Your fight is with me, not them. Let it end here, between us, the way it should have ended 22 years ago." For a long moment, Beau said nothing. Eva could see the war in his eyes, hatred fighting against something else. Honor, maybe, or just the basic human recognition that revenge against innocence was not justice. If I agree, he said slowly, how do I know you will not fight? How do I know this is not another trick? Because I am tired, Eva said, and she let the weariness show. Let him see the weight of 58 years and 31 kills and 22 years of pretending. I am tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being that woman. If my death buys peace for those people, then it is a price I am willing to pay. She thought of Toby, of Annabelle, of Reverend Stonewell and Dr. Aldridge, and all the people who had become her family over 2 decades. Thought of the roses in her garden, and the quiet mornings on her porch, and all the small kindnesses that had redeemed her from the killer she had been. Josiah taught me that some things are worth dying for, she said quietly. Shadow Creek is one of them. Beau's face twisted with emotions too complex to name. My brothers were worth dying for too, but you did not give them that choice. You just killed them. I know, and I am sorry, truly, but they were trying to kill me first. What happened in Tucson was survival, not murder. They were trying to kill you because you hunted them like animals, because they were murderers, because they killed Josiah and a dozen other innocent people, because someone had to stop them. They faced each other across 20 feet of trampled ground, 2 people shaped by violence and loss. And for a moment, Eva thought she saw something crack in Beau's facade, some recognition that the cycle of revenge could end here if he chose to let it. Then Luther Harker, still conscious despite his wounds, raised his fallen pistol with his good hand and fired. The shot was wild, thrown off by pain and fury, but it caught Beau in the back, high on the right side, spinning him around with a cry of shock and betrayal. You said I could have her, Luther screamed, struggling to his feet. You promised me the bounty if I helped you. Before Luther could fire again, Zeke's rifle spoke from the darkness, and Luther went down for the final time, a hole through his chest that meant he would not rise again. The camp erupted. Outlaws opened fire wildly, not sure where the shots were coming from, hitting their own men as often as enemies. Eva dove for cover behind a water barrel as bullets tore through the air where she had been standing. Beau lay on the ground, bleeding, his hand pressed against the wound in his back. Eva made a decision that would have been unthinkable to the old her, but was the only choice Evangeline Thornfield could make. She ran toward Beau, grabbed him under the arms, and dragged him behind cover, even as bullets kicked up dirt around them. Why? Beau gasped, his face pale with shock and blood loss. Because I am not that woman anymore, she said, pulling his shirt open to examine the wound. Because Josiah taught me that mercy matters. Because your brothers died for their choices, but you still have a chance to make different ones. The wound was serious, but not immediately fatal. The bullet had gone through clean, missing the lung by inches. If Eva could get him stabilized and out of this chaos, he might survive. She tore strips from her shirt and packed the wound, working with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done battlefield medicine more times than she could count. Around them, the camp descended into chaos as outlaws fired at shadows, and Zeke's rifle picked them off one by one from positions they could not locate. Your brothers were not evil men, Eva said as she worked. They were shaped by hard times and harder choices, just like you, just like me. But the killing has to stop somewhere, Beau. It has to end before everyone is dead, and the only thing left is ghosts. She finished packing the wound and looked him in the eyes. I am giving you the choice I never gave them. Live. Walk away from this. Build something instead of destroying. Honor their memory by being better than they were. Beau stared at her, blood seeping through the makeshift bandages, and Eva saw the moment when 20 years of hatred met the reality of an old woman trying to save his life despite every reason not to. I do not understand you, he whispered. You do not have to, Eva said. You just have to choose. Live or die. Peace or revenge. The past or the future. Zeke materialized from the darkness, his rifle smoking, his face grim. Eva, we need to move. Now. There are still 30 men out there, and they are getting organized. Eva looked at Beau one more time. What is it going to be? For a long moment, Beau said nothing. Then with visible effort, he raised his voice to carry across the camp. Cease fire, everyone stand down. The shooting tapered off, confused outlaws looking to their wounded leader for direction. It is over, Beau called out, his voice weak but determined. Let them go. Let the town go. Luther is dead. The job is finished. But boss, someone protested. We can still take them. I said it is over. Beau's shout cost him blood flowing faster from the wound, but his authority held. Anyone who wants to keep fighting can do it without me. The rest of you tend to the wounded and prepare to move out at first light. Eva met his eyes one last time and saw something there that might have been the beginning of understanding, or at least the end of hatred. Go, Beau said quietly, before I change my mind. Eva and Zeke withdrew into the darkness, moving fast, expecting bullets in their backs at any moment. None came. They reached their horses and rode hard for Shadow Creek, the eastern sky just beginning to pale with the promise of dawn. Behind them, the outlaw camp began the long work of collecting its dead and wounded, and Beauregard Ketchum lay staring at the stars and wondering what came after you let go of the only thing that had given your life meaning for 20 years. They reached town as the sun broke over the mountains, painting Main Street in shades of gold that made everything look clean and new and full of promise. Toby and the militia were positioned at their posts, ready for an attack that never came. And when they saw Eva and Zeke riding in alive, the relief was palpable. Eva dismounted slowly, every muscle in her body protesting after the night's exertions. She was bone-weary, running on nothing but will and the knowledge that it was finally truly over. Dr. Aldridge came running with her medical bag, Annabelle at her heels, and Eva found herself surrounded by people asking questions and expressing relief and trying to understand what had happened. She told them simply. Luther Harker had tried to betray Beauregard Ketchum and paid with his life. Zeke had confirmed the kill before they rode out. Beau had called off the attack, his thirst for revenge extinguished by an act of mercy he never expected. Shadow Creek was safe. What she did not tell them was the cost, the narrow margin by which they had survived the moment in that camp when she had been certain she would die. Some truths were too heavy to share. Over the following days, word filtered back through travelers and telegraph that the Harker Gang had dissolved completely. Cutter Rawlins had been found by a passing cavalry patrol 3 days after the canyon confrontation, half blind and delirious, making his way south on foot. The army surgeon saved his remaining eye, but his days as a sharpshooter were over. Last anyone heard, he was working as a clerk in a Helena trading post, a broken man who flinched at loud noises. Quick Jimmy had bled out from his shoulder wound somewhere between Shadow Creek and the Wyoming border, his body discovered by trappers and buried in an unmarked grave. Vicente Morales disappeared entirely, probably fled to Mexico with his shattered hand. Ox Brennan turned himself into authorities in Butte, tired of running, and was serving 10 years for robbery. Dutch Pete was found dead in a Denver alley, victim of a card game gone wrong. The rest of Luther's original 12 had scattered to the winds, wanted men going to ground rather than risk capture now that their leader was dead and their organization shattered. Beauregard Ketchum had been seen in Denver alive and recovering, working as a guard for a mining company. The story reaching Shadow Creek claimed he had given up the outlaw life, though whether that was truth or wishful thinking remained unclear. Eva returned to her cabin in her garden, and for a week she did nothing but tend her roses and try to remember what peace felt like. The town's attitude toward her had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. People still called her Widow Thornfield or Ma'am Eva, but now there was a different quality to it, respect mixed with wariness, gratitude tempered by the knowledge of what she was capable of. Some families had left uncomfortable living near a woman with her past. Others stayed and made peace with it, recognizing that sometimes the line between hero and killer was context and intent rather than action. Eva did not blame those who left. She understood fear, had lived with it herself for 2 decades. On the 10th day after the confrontation, Eva was in her garden when a rider approached. She recognized Zeke before he dismounted, and she set down her pruning shears to greet him. "Thought you had moved on," she said. "Was planning to," Zeke admitted, "but then I got to thinking. Town could use a good scout, someone who knows the territory, someone who can spot trouble before it arrives. Shadow Creek does not have money to pay a scout. I know, but it has decent people who deserve protecting. Figure I owe Josiah that much. And maybe I owe you too for showing me what mercy looks like, even when hate seems easier." Eva smiled, and it was the first genuine smile that had touched her face in weeks. "I think Shadow Creek would be lucky to have you, Zeke Hammond." He tipped his hat and rode toward town to speak with Muller about making it official. Eva returned to her roses, the peacemaker, now hanging openly on a peg inside her cabin door, no longer hidden but no longer her first choice either. Just a tool kept ready in case it was needed, balanced by the garden shears and preserving jars, and all the instruments of creation that had defined her for 20 years. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Eva sat on her porch with Annabelle teaching the girl the names of constellations, while Toby worked in the nearby smithy, his hammer ringing in steady rhythm. Reverend Stonewell walked by and paused at her gate. "How are you, Eva?" he asked. "Tired," she said honestly, "but alive and grateful." Josiah would be proud of you. I hope so. I tried to honor what he taught me. Mercy when possible. Violence only as a last resort. And always, always protect the innocent. Matthias nodded slowly. Some legends die, some retire, and some just find something worth protecting. Is that from scripture? Eva asked with a slight smile. No, just an old man's observation about extraordinary people. He continued his evening walk, leaving Eva with Annabelle and the stars, and the profound quiet that came with survival. She had been the legend, the fastest gun in 4 territories, the woman who put 31 outlaws in the ground and disappeared. She had killed and hunted and lived by violence for years that had felt like lifetimes. But she had also been Evangeline Thornfield for 20 years, tending roses and healing wounds, and building a life from kindness rather than death. Perhaps she could be both. The guardian when needed, the gardener when not. A woman complex enough to contain both mercy and steel, both violence and creation, both the phantom and the widow. Annabelle pointed at a constellation and asked its name, and Eva answered, and the night embraced them both with its infinite patience, and somewhere in the darkness, Josiah's memory smiled its approval, and the roses bloomed in shadow and light, and Shadow Creek slept safe beneath stars that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. Some legends do not die, Eva thought, as she carried the sleeping child inside. They just transform, becoming something harder to name but no less powerful. A woman who knows when to draw and when to holster, when to fight and when to forgive, when to be phantom and when to be simply beautifully human.